You're listening to the Sass Says podcast. I'm your host, Christy Rocha, also known as Sass. I identify as a woman, a wife, and a mother. That should tell you a lot already. And over the last few years, I've learned the value of talk therapy. I have seen how my inner work not only enhances my own well-being, but also my marriage, my parenting, my relationships. And in fact, you wouldn't be hearing this right now if it weren't for the work I've done. My mission is to debunk the misconceptions and stigmas around what therapy is and who it's for. Let's normalize working on our mental health and seeking help when needed. We've all heard of self-care, self-help, and self-love, but do you often wonder how to actually make it all happen? I do. You'll hear strategy-based conversations with professionals, as well as inspiring and validating stories from women who are just like you and me. Think of this podcast as the weekly therapy sessions you didn't know you needed, with a dash of sass, a lot of vulnerability, and me, relentlessly asking, but how? Hello. Okay, my guest today is quite the rock star. Her name is Amanda Young. Amanda is a mental health advocate, author, and podcast host whose personal mission is to help eliminate the stigma of brain illnesses by educating people on what depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress, and bipolar actually are. She starts important conversations on her social media platforms and her podcast by encouraging others to speak up and seek help. Amanda is a firm believer that her brain health conditions and her unique voice are her superpowers. All right, so today, Amanda shares a story of a pivotal moment in her life that changed the course of her career and pretty much her identity. She shares what it was like to get a bipolar 2 diagnosis as a 30-something-year-old, how her 5 mental health disorders affect her life, her marriage, her work. Amanda shares how she copes, what medication has done for her, and why she believes her disorders are her superpowers. And I'll just tell you this, you will definitely agree by the time you're done listening. Before we get to Amanda, I have to remind you of this amazing service that our friend Tara Clark is offering. Tara, who you all know and love from the super popular Instagram account Modern Mom Probs, and from episode 3 of this podcast, launched Modern Mom Style Box. Modern Mom Style Box is a rental service that makes it easy to wear new clothes all month long. From seasonal staples to statement pieces, you can rent unlimited looks for just one flat fee of $60 a month. Okay, so first, here's what you're going to do. You're going to browse the site. You're going to add all the styles that you love to your virtual closet. And once you've added a bunch, you'll be mailed 3 items at a time to wear as much as you want. When you're ready for something new, send those 3 back and get ready for the next box. You can effortlessly switch up your look all month long with an unlimited rotation of styles delivered right to your door. Yes, this is as wonderful as it sounds. Trust me, I use it. So, if you're just looking to change up your style, this is for you. Are you pregnant? Yeah, this is for you. There are a ton of maternity options available. If maybe you're postpartum, not feeling your pre-baby wardrobe, this is for you. Or maybe you're not feeling the stores right now. You're just busy and you want to click and have new clothes. This is for you. Simply wear, return, and leave the rest to the team at Modern Mom Style Box. And for me, the absolutely no-brainer cherry on top is that this is Tara. Tara knows what we want, what we need, and I have 100% confidence in everything Tara does. So check it out today. The link will be in the show notes. Here's Amanda. Hey, Amanda. So nice to meet you. Thank you for being here with me.
Wow, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here today.
Yeah, I'm obsessed with everything you're doing. You're an amazing advocate. Your platforms are not only pleasing to look at, but they're so informative and so relatable. So I'm excited to dive in, and thank you for all that you're doing.
Oh, thank you. It's always good to hear, if people like the stuff that you put out. So thank you.
Yeah, I know. I say to people sometimes it feels a little bit like you just throw content out into a black hole. It's like, is anybody there?
No, I definitely feel that way. I was telling my husband the other day that I've kind of switched up my strategy and stopped the hustle and the grind and just kind of practice what I'm preaching of listening to my mental health. And right now I've taken a week break on social media, but
Mm,
I'm still gaining followers. And so I'm like, okay, the right people are finding me, and
yeah.
my people is here to hold me, are here to hold me. So
Yeah, and you know what? I wouldn't have expected to start here, but you know what's funny is that, and maybe it's because both of our platforms center around mental health, but I find that not like social media, even email correspondence, um, just the ways that we are interacting with each other digitally, I feel like have become a little bit more accepting of time and space. Like,
mm,
I don't know. I just and again, I maybe it's because I'm always interacting with mostly people who, care about mental health and want to talk about it. So
right.
maybe there is a little bit more what's the word I'm looking for? Like a little bit more leeway there with whoever I'm interacting with, but it does seem that, or I don't know, maybe I just don't care as much as I used to.
I definitely agree with you. I just emailed you before the interview and your automatic reply came on about, hey, I have
Oh
an
yeah.
automatic reply, but I deal with anxiety and depression, and I'll get to you when I
Yeah.
get to you. And I was like, that is so cool. I want
Yeah.
to adopt that. I love that.
I
And
had to.
yeah,
Yeah.
and even just recently, I've been applying to different jobs and just looking for a transition. And in interviews, people are asking, like, what are ways that you take care of your mental health? And I'm like, whoa,
Wow.
this is wild, even from like
Wow.
5 years ago going through
Yeah.
interviews to now.
I'm so happy to hear that actually. It's been a long time since I've like been in any sort of, job setting outside of my house, and
Mm-hmm.
that's so refreshing. Um I yeah, my automatic reply truly came from, I like I don't know. I grew up and started my adult life in that corporate America hustle and bustle where everyone
Mm.
needed a email response within 24 hours. And you know what? Being self-employed, having two little kids and mental health challenges, it's just not always possible to respond to you, sometimes even within 48 hours. So
Yeah.
I was like having a lot of anxiety about emails just sitting there, and I was like, okay, you just have to put this out there now and be real about it, because what else can you do,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. So anyway, let's go back. Let's get into your story. Um where would you say, someone listening is experiencing you and your platform for the first time, where would you start your story with mental health, and and just take us back a little bit about ultimately how you got to be doing a podcast and an advocate and writing books and doing all the things that you're doing. Yeah.
Yeah, all the things that I'm
Yeah.
doing.
Yeah.
It all goes hand in hand, which we will definitely get to. As for me, I would say that I grew up in the 90s and early 2000s, so I'm your true millennial.
Mhm.
And, mental health was a different conversation back then. It was really taboo to talk about. I didn't know any of my friends that went to therapy. And the fact that I was forced into therapy, which my mom and dad will admit, they're like, yeah, we definitely forced you in because, there were some life experiences that our family went through that were
Mm.
kind of traumatic. And they were like, "Hey, therapy is a thing. I guess we should like give you that option if you want it." And yeah, it wasn't talked about. So going into college where suddenly you're alone and you need to like figure out how to take care of yourself, and no one's telling you, "Hey, stick to a routine," or "Don't stay up too late," or "Don't drink a ton of alcohol," like all these
Mhm.
things. And so I would say that I should have been clued into my mental health at that point, but I was just doing a lot of escapism and avoidance in my
Mm.
life and kind of running away from problems that I had created on purpose and not on purpose with
Mhm.
relationships and things like that. And I am a true Capricorn, perfectionist,
Oh, me
Enneagram
too.
3. So like I am extremely driven. There's no plan B. If I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it times 10, and while that's a great way to live, it's not sustainable
Mm-hmm.
all the time. And so it was always my dream to become a killer whale trainer. And I had worked my entire life to achieve that job. And I got it, and I had a really big ego that came along with that, and just loved doing that job, loved proving people and the media wrong that I am a good person and I'm a human and I take care of these animals, and there's just a lot of misconceptions.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, one day I woke up to a phone call that said, "Hey, Amanda, you've been laid off. We don't need you anymore. Your position's been terminated." And that for me is the first time that I can like look back in my early adult life that really just kind of was that life altering moment. I can like for me it's like the crack that splits the canyon, and it just keeps
Mm-hmm.
going and going, and that was like one of the very big fissures in my life. And because I had tied my entire identity to being a killer whale trainer and all the sacrifices that I made and all the achievements that had come with that, it was Amanda, the killer whale trainer. And I had always struggled with depression and anxiety growing up. Like I said, there had been some circumstances in my life growing up. And that was the first moment as an adult that it caught up to me. Because, like I said, I had been distracting myself and making myself so busy that I didn't have time to think about my mental health. And
Mm-hmm.
when I finally had time, when I was laid off and didn't have a job, that is when I really realized, oh, there's something going on here. I think there might be a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was in 2019. So I would say 2019 is when I started to first own my mental health, but it was a 2-year long journey from that point to eventually get to proper diagnoses and treatment plan and all of that.
Okay. All right. So, and we'll get into that, but I want to go back for a minute. Um, what was therapy like for you as a kid? I know you said that your parents, forced you in, but once you were there, was it a positive experience for you, or was it like, I'm being forced to be here and I'm going to resist this in every way possible?
Yeah, so my mom and I were actually laughing about it the other day because I was a minor. So back then, my parents had to sit in on my sessions.
Wow.
And like I think things have changed
Yeah,
since then,
they
but
have. Yes, they have.
back then I was a minor. I was like 14 years old and in full-fledged teen angst and did not want to be there. So like arms crossed, legs crossed, like body posture and behavior was just like I don't want to be here
Mm,
because I didn't really want to think about the extreme bullying that I had been through. And I didn't want to talk about it because if I stuffed it down, it didn't exist.
right.
And so while my parents were so loving and supportive and like were trying hard, it wasn't my decision, so it wasn't going to work for me. And again, that goes back to like the core of my personality is
Right.
if it's not my decision, I'm not going to be on board with it.
Fair enough.
So no
And
matter how nice that therapist was and tried
right,
all the tactics of like, hey, bring your favorite food in, like let's talk about Starbucks, I was like, I don't
right.
want to be here. I'm not going to talk to you.
Yeah. Yeah. I so given your experience, do you have any advice either for parents or teens who may need help in sort of like bridging that gap?
Yeah. One thing that I have really committed my life to and have started this ripple effect in my own family is leading by example. And
Mm,
so in my own family, I finally had that breaking point where I went to therapy of my own accord and it changed my life. And so
yeah.
why wouldn't I want everyone to feel that way?
Mm,
And again, granted, there were some big things that brought me back to therapy in my late 20s, but I really started normalizing that conversation and probably bring up therapy in every conversation with my family. And now it's to the point where one, two, three, more than half of my family is in therapy now and have
wow.
their own therapists. And so, again, just leading by example. And someday when my husband and I have kids, we're going to talk about how we're in therapy and it's normal. And
Mm-hmm.
hopefully someday our kids growing up like, hey, can I have a therapist?
Right.
Like, am I old
Yeah.
enough? Can I go to therapy?
Yeah.
Because it's one of my favorite places to be. I look forward to it
Yeah.
all the time.
I love that, actually, leading by example, because it's been, um, you know, I had, who did I talk to? Oh no, I interviewed Dr. Akuya Boateng, and she talks about, she coined this phrase like first generation therapy goer.
Mm,
And I just love that. And not that I'm like the first person in my family to go to counseling, but it is always something that crosses my mind as I start now my family,
mm-hmm.
and I'm always like thinking about, yeah, when and like almost how quickly can I get my kids a therapist, and
Yeah.
is my husband going to be okay with that, and is anyone going to have an issue? But I love the idea of just leading by example, and that is so comforting to me, because everything about parenting I have learned has come down to modeling. So I may
Mm-hmm.
not even have to say, hey, do you want a therapist? Like, they might just say to me, I want one.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny because so often my friends will tell me, like, you talk about your therapist like she's your best friend. I'm like, well, she is.
She is. Yeah,
She
totally.
literally knows my deepest, darkest secrets. And she's the first person I tell when I have something exciting.
Yeah.
Like, it's her and my husband. And like, those are my people. That's my inner circle, you know?
Yeah. No, my therapist is my best friend, and I know
Yeah.
all of like 3 things about her.
Yep. Hmm.
It's a funny relationship for sure. Um, all right. So working with animals, dream job, killer whales. Like,
Yeah.
what what is that about? Where did that come from?
Yeah, so I feel like that cliche kid growing up. For some reason, everyone in the 90s was like, I'm going to be a marine biologist. I'm going to work with
Huh.
dolphins. That was
Yeah.
like a lot of the things that kids wanted to do. And, I was lucky enough and privileged enough that I had the access to go to zoos and aquariums all the time as a kid. And that was my favorite place to be. I love animals so much. I always dreamed that I could talk to them and they could talk back to me. And
Mm.
as I got older, I was like, I really like animals more than people because animals are so unproblematic and people are annoying sometimes, like, ugh,
Yeah.
people are awful, and as I'm getting older and my worldview is expanding, I'm just seeing that, like, the world is not this good, happy, cheery place that you think it is as a kid.
Mm.
And I love being with animals and just watching them learn. And I really craved that relationship that I saw between animal trainers and animals because
Mm.
the relationships built are based on trust and history of positive reinforcement and learning and growing together and bonding. And I always just strove for that. And so my degree is in behavioral psychology. So the same principles that you can use, like you said, to model to kids and people, and the same way that positive reinforcement tactics are used with people is the exact same way that we train animals.
Hmm.
And so it was so cool to apply that to animals and learn about precursors and DROs and DRIs and all these awesome principles, and then apply it to working with animals and building trust of these incredible, huge, massive, and at sometimes dangerous animals. And to know that I knew them personally and they could pick me out of a crowd and know me personally too.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like, and as you're talking, and I wanted to ask you, like, I've heard of y- you know, of people working with horses and
Mm-hmm.
dogs as part of therapy. Like, do you think now in hindsight that work was partly therapeutic for you?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Because my entire life I strove to be this perfect, unattainable, unrelatable woman. Like I wanted to be as special and unique as possible. But in that is very lonely because if you're
Mm,
so special and so unique, no one else relates to you, And
yes.
so I always felt like an outsider in the friend group because I like to know other people's problems, but heaven forbid I have a problem. I don't
Mm,
I don't have any faults or bad things, you know? And
Mm-hmm.
so working with animals, it was just great to leave all of that at the door and just deal with the present and know that I didn't even have to be speaking and I could be communicating and understood purely by body language and eye contact. And yeah, I think it was a way for me to kind of get outside my own head.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so unfortunately getting laid off, or now I know you see it as a blessing.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about the identity crisis that you went through and how what did it look like for you in if you don't mind, kind of the darkest, toughest
Hmm.
point of that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's something that I love talking about now because like you mentioned and observed, it was such a turning point in my life. And while there's part of me that still wishes that I was working there, I know that the domino effect after that, I would not be where I am today if that
Mm-hmm.
didn't happen. And getting laid off again, I had created this entire identity of again the most special, unattainable, unrelatable person who knows a killer whale trainer unless you live here in Florida. Like
Right.
no one knows that. And I would pride myself off like whenever my husband and I would go to work events with him, they'd be like, "Oh, what does your wife do?" And I'm like, "I'm a killer whale trainer." I'm like,
Yeah.
"What? Like who does that?" And I was just like, "Yeah, I love that feeling, you know?" And heavy the fall.
Mm,
And it was a real gut punch because I immediately went into PR mode and was like, how am I going to spin this? How am I going to flip this? How am I going to come out on top on the other side? Like, I was already ready to leave. I have this new dream lined up. Or, how am I going to make people think that this isn't affecting me as much as it is?
mhm,
And so I kind of felt this shift in me of really almost creating two different personas of like Amanda to the outside world and then Amanda at home that my husband saw.
mm,
And it was exhausting to keep that up. And I definitely kept that up for a couple years. But in the deepest, darkest parts of my brain, I just kept hearing over and over, you're not needed. You're
mm,
not worthy. You weren't good enough. We don't need you. You don't matter. You were a name on a page that we decided for a budget cut. Like, she's gone.
yeah.
And the rational part of my brain knows that it was nothing personal. It wasn't that I was an awful employee. It was literally just budget cuts from a company that we all know is not doing too hot,
Mhm,
but I took it so personally and I just had this huge chip on my shoulder and I almost didn't let myself feel all of those feelings because I needed to get back out on top quickly because I didn't want to own those feelings.
mhm, mhm. And you've mentioned a few times, your husband and kind of the version that everyone else saw, the version that he saw. How did all of this impact your marriage?
Yeah. So I love my husband. Shout out to Kevin. He's incredible. He and I met my freshman year of college. So when I say that he has seen every version of me, he has. Um, throughout all the highs and lows, which we'll get to and it'll make sense later. But he has just been such a constant in my life, which I'm so thankful for because without him, I don't think I would have owned up to a lot of things. I think I would have just kept running, but he was always this person here, like, no, you have quote unquote duty as a wife. Like, you agreed to marry me. There's responsibility that comes with that. And we said we wanted a loving marriage, which means that there are things you have to do to actively keep that and attain that. And he always just kept bringing me down to earth. And he's really good about calling me out in a polite, respectful way, but he sees through the facade that I put onto the world or used to, and he'd just be like, "Amanda, come on,
Yeah.
Amanda, stop." And so he's just an incredible person in my life that I'm so thankful for. He really has pushed me to continue becoming the best version of myself.
At any point, did you fear that constant going away?
Yeah, it was a lot of fights that we had. Again, the
Mm,
job and the career I chose, there's lots of sacrifices, and animals still need to be fed on holidays, and
yeah.
animals get sick and you need to watch them overnight. And oh, there's a hurricane, we have to evacuate our animals when I
Mm,
worked for one job on the coast. And there were times that I worked overtime and couldn't tell him because my phone was in a locker and I needed to stay there to handle a crisis. And
mm,
we kept having the same fight where he was like, I don't feel chosen. I
mm.
feel like you would choose the animals and that job over me
Wow.
at any moment. And I answered, I was like, well, yeah. I mean, yeah. And then in my brain, I was like, well, yeah, like, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's when he looked at me and he was like, that's not, like, I don't agree with that. I don't
Right.
want that. And that was the moment I was like, oh, yeah, there are two people in this relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah, he does have feelings that he's allowed to feel, you know? Oh,
Mm-hmm.
okay. Yeah. So that was like the first moment that I realized that, oh, hey, there's two people in this relationship. His feelings matter just as much as mine. And I realized that his dreams of buying a home, having a white picket fence with two dogs, and starting a family were just as valid as my dreams of wanting to pursue this career. And that was the first time that I realized, wow, my actions have an effect on him, and it's not just me. Even
Right.
though we had been married at this point like 4 years.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you were together a long time.
Yeah, and at this point, I mean, now we've been together almost a decade. And so,
Mm,
yeah, it was definitely an eye-opening moment when he finally was like, yeah, no, it's not gonna fly.
right. Yeah. Yeah. So I want to ask, and because I struggled with this early on, and so I'm curious what what the two of you have either worked out or discussed or whatever. But at this point, and I know I'm fast forwarding a lot, but since we're talking about your marriage right now,
Mm-hmm.
how does his support what does his support look like to you now?
Yeah.
Like how
So,
like I always find, and let me just say this so you can incorporate this in your answer if it applies, but I always find it so challenging, to try to do justice what I'm experiencing to someone who doesn't experience mental health challenges to the same level or degree that I do.
yes.
So how
Oh.
do you communicate it, and how do you what does the support look like now?
Yes. So once I finally made the decision to go back to therapy, it was him. He eventually just came to me and sat me down and was like, I can't help you anymore. I know you see me as this like shoulder and this figure in your life, but I physically don't know what to do. You're scaring me. I don't want to lose you. I don't know what's going on.
Mm,
Please, please go to therapy. I know it needs to be your decision. So I've printed out this list of people under our insurance and I've called these people and they specialize in this. And so he like did as much as he physically could to help
mm-hmm,
me without forcing me. But now we've come to this agreement where there's a lot of grace. He doesn't have any mental health disorders, and
mm.
good for him. That's amazing. Like shout out to you, Kev. Great job. But I was not
Good job,
blessed with
Kev.
that. I have 5 mental health disorders now.
Mm,
And it finally got to the point where, when I would talk about my anxiety, he would be like, well, don't be anxious. I'm like, yeah, it doesn't work that way.
yeah,
Or "Oh, I'm so depressed." And he's like, well, get up and go for a run. Like,
right,
no.
right.
And so finally, and his biggest thing, he could never understand intrusive thoughts. And when I would tell him that I had, suicidal ideation, he was like, I don't get that. How on earth? And
Mm,
so finally I love music and movies and these instances where mental health is really starting to be portrayed respectfully and
mm-hmm,
accurately. And so whenever I find a song, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is what depression feels like.
mm,
This is anxiety. Or, we were watching Euphoria together, and I'm like, that's an intrusive thought.
mm-hmm,
And it helped
mm-hmm,
him realize that while he might not have these chronic disorders, he has moments of anxiety. He has
right.
moments where he feels low and depressed, and it might not be constant. And he's had an intrusive thought. He's like, oh, I've had that.
Mm-hmm,
Okay. And he's like, I didn't act on it, but yeah, it like popped in my brain like, wow, we're standing really tall on this hill. wonder if I jump, and things like that. He's like,
Right.
oh, okay. And so it's been cool to see him realize what I'm going through, but it also helps humanize again what I'm feeling because I'm like, okay, I'm not the only one. And he has found these instances too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. So, and thank you for that because I think I haven't used music, but I have shared that I'll sometimes send my husband podcast episodes of people
Mm,
who can put, more, who can put clearer words to what I'm feeling than I can.
mm-hmm.
Or honestly, sometimes I even send him like TikToks and memes that are just like, this is
Yep.
it,
Yep.
Um, all right. So, 5 mental health disorders. What are they?
Yes. So, like we talked about, I was always kind of clued in that depression and anxiety were there. Once I finally got to the point of going to a therapist and then being clued in that, hey, something is wrong mentally, and I'm on antidepressants, I'm on anti-anxiety meds, but I'm getting worse the higher the dose they give me.
Hmm.
So I finally went to a psychiatrist, and that is what changed my life completely. So I officially got diagnosed with major depressive disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, attention deficit disorder, post traumatic stress disorder, and bipolar 2 disorder.
Wow.
Yeah. And I say that so like willy nilly. I'm like, yeah, I got these. But when I
That's
was
like so
diagnosed,
lovely. Yeah,
the
go ahead.
last two were a big hit.
Mm. Okay, so first of all, I think it is so refreshing actually to hear you speak of it that way because it's like I don't know. You can people can talk about physical ailments and physical illnesses that way to some degree, and I don't believe that mental health should be any different.
Hmm.
And I do hear you. I can totally imagine how, you know, scary or intimidating it probably was initially,
Hmm.
but it is in sharing and here and being out there and talking about them the way you do that's the only way that things are going to change. So
Yeah.
I really appreciate it, and I'm very, like I said, it's very refreshing. So
Oh, it's
yeah,
funny.
I
I
just
I looked at them as life-ending diagnoses, and now I wear them as a badge of honor
yeah,
because, oh my God, I am strong.
yeah,
To go through what I've been through and then to make it that long undiagnosed, getting
yeah,
diagnosed at 29 years old. Oh my gosh.
yeah,
I've been living my whole life sick and I didn't even know it. So
yeah,
it's this freedom of, okay, now what can I accomplish now that
mm,
I've got meds and therapy and a support system and answers?
yeah, yeah, and I bet it was very validating to some extent too.
Oh, yes. Oh,
To
yes.
feel like probably like I'm picturing like a thousand-piece puzzle just like thrown in the air that finally got put together. you know.
Well, and
Uh,
like I had said at the beginning of our conversation, I had worked my entire life to be unrelatable and unique. And I remember sitting on the couch waiting for like the answers to my quizzes that I took, because you take your quiz when you go to psychiatrist office about, well, I think
mhm.
of it as a quiz. There's no right or wrong answer, but you take the survey, I guess we'll say.
Okay.
And I was so overwhelmingly thankful that I was so textbook. Like she looked at me and she's like, I don't like, girl, your textbook. Boom, boom,
Wow.
boom. And I was like, oh, thank God, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. I totally get that. All right. So, talk to me like, okay, I want to talk to you, start with the bipolar 2 because
Yeah.
I've not discussed that on the show yet. And I think that that is the area where I'm least versed. So, if at any point, I say something completely ignorant, please call me out because, I don't know. I don't know what I don't know.
Hey,
So,
I am still learning too. Because
all right.
I've only had this for a couple months that I've known.
Wow. Yes. Okay. So, someone listening has never heard this term before. How would you describe it?
Mm. I would say so with bipolar disorder, it's a big umbrella. And
Okay.
I believe now there's over 5 different subcategories of it.
Hmm.
And it typically people Researchers think that it is mostly hereditary, but also brought on in times of high stress, trauma, substance abuse, and like moments of anxiety. And so with bipolar, like the word says, there's two poles. So everyone, has moments of happiness and moments of sadness and, live your life in between. So with someone who is neurotypical, so they do not have a
Mm-hmm.
mental health disorder, you live your life. You kind of swing in between the two poles and you might have sad days, you might have happy days. With bipolar, either bipolar 1, you are living at the high points. So you are having these moments, they call them manic phases, and you're
Mm-hmm.
having mania, and it can present itself in many different ways, which we can get into. And it's just extreme happiness and confidence, and again, these moments of ego, and I'm unstoppable and on top of the world. And then the converse of that is extreme depression. So, say people live their life between a 6 on each side, bipolar would take it to a 12. So it's past past the
Mm-hmm.
10.
Mm-hmm.
And with bipolar 2, so if bipolar 1 you're living more in these mania phases, bipolar 2 you're living more in the depressive phases and you have moments of mania, but the majority of your episodes are in this depression.
Mm-hmm.
And so with me having bipolar 2, like I said, it's a spectrum disorder, like a lot of mental health disorders. So when I'm talking about my experiences, I'm not saying that they relate
Right.
to anyone else's and all of that. So I do want to preface that. But me personally, it was harder to diagnose my bipolar 2 because my mania presents itself in extreme extrovertedness, um, extreme achievement and overachievement, extreme organization, creativity. Yeah, definitely overspending, but I'm like a high fashion girl. And so,
Right. All things you're praised for.
right, exactly. All things growing up, I was praised for of being this like model student and staying up all nighters all the time to go above and beyond at homework. And so what I thought were core personality traits were actually part of something that my brain was a little off with. And so yeah, that was harder for me to diagnose, but the depression, like I had talked about, I had been clued in. So I would
Mm-hmm.
stimulate these manic phases of like, okay, we got to get away from the depression. So let's do crafting and let's do tons of outings with friends and let's do all
Yeah.
these other things to escape it.
Yeah. Yeah. How long do how long for you does an episode last?
Yeah, so before I was clued into it, I can look back in my life and see months to years of a
Wow.
manic phase. I look
Wow.
back at a lot of college and I'm like, yeah, I don't know how I did that other than being manic, and
Wow.
working 3 jobs and being in a sorority and having an internship and a long distance boyfriend and like all of these things. I'm like, how did I do that? I don't know how I did that. And it's because I was running at 200%. But then the times I would crash, it was awful. And I couldn't get out of bed. I couldn't brush my teeth. But
Mm-hmm.
now, I would say now that I'm on medicine and I'm regulated and I have a therapist, my manic phases, I had an episode the other day where I walked into Michael's and bought $100 worth of yarn because I like wanted to crochet this thing that I saw on YouTube. And my rule now is I save all my receipts because the next day I woke
Mm,
up and I wanted nothing to do with that yarn. I was like, ew,
wow.
ew, what, ugh, ugh, I don't want to do
Yeah.
that. So I was like,
Yeah.
okay, give myself grace. I'm gonna go return it.
Yeah. Yeah. I am surprised. I would never have thought that an episode could go for years.
And again, it's a spectrum. So there
Yeah, for someone
are
else it might not,
someone
right?
else they
Yeah.
couldn't. And when I was talking with my psychiatrist about it, she was like, yeah, sure, you dipped, but you stayed in that episode a long time.
Wow.
And there were moments of depression, but clinically speaking, yeah, a lot of my 20s was a manic episode.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, wild and exhausting. It was
It is
exhausting.
crazy. Yeah, that is like nuts. Okay. So now being on medication, like was getting on medication like a night and day, or how did that process go?
Yeah,
Like did you
so
feel night and day different, or and do you feel night and day different now? Like I guess I'm wondering, like, pre-meds, post-meds, like
mhm.
how different do you feel, and how quickly did that transition happen?
It's so my husband and I have a joke because again, he has known me the most like deeply and personally through this phase. While I'm
Mm-hmm.
close with my friends and family, again, he's been that constant. And so once I got on meds, I kid you not, like 24 hours, I woke up the next day and it was like, is this how people live? Is what? eh, What?
Yeah.
The birds are chirping and it's not overstimulating me, and the sunshine feels good on my skin, and I can brush my teeth and not have to like work myself up to do it. What? And I told him, I came downstairs and I was like, do you exist and you're not exhausted? Like you just exist freely? And he's like, yes, Amanda, welcome to the rest of the world. Like, welcome.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
so once we like adjusted things, and because again, because of my multitude of mental disorders, I'm on a lot of meds and they
Right.
all do something different. So we did have to figure out this cocktail, but my husband and I, it is night and day different. And a week into it, he was like, "You just seem happy
Mm-hmm.
and like really like you are present in your life finally." And you're not convincing anyone that you're here and you're not the shell of a human. He's like, I have never experienced you like this. Like, I think you're actually living and liking it.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, yes. Also, gut punch. Ouch. You know?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we have this joke that we have of, there in the moments of our relationship, again, I was in such survival mode and everything was exhausting towards the end before I went to the psychiatrist. I told him, I was like, I'm exhausted just existing and I'm a shell of a human. And I don't know how, like, people can't feel this way because I don't want to keep living,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
I know in my brain that I want to, but I'm just so exhausted that oh my gosh. And we talk about it as the before time because there are isms that he has and habits that he has that I didn't know existed until now I've been on meds. And it's
Like
this
what?
whole new focus. Like he enjoys doing random things. And I'm just like, have you always done that? He's like, yeah. Or, what used to throw me into like a really like aggressive fight with him about hearing him swallow his saliva because again, I was so overstimulated by
Mm-hmm.
life. Now I'm just like, it doesn't faze me. And there's just so much grace that I've been able to give myself and then translate that to other people. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, we'll sit down and watch a movie and I'll be like, oh my gosh, I've never seen this. And he's like, Amanda, we have watched this movie 3 times, but
Wow.
I don't really think you were there. I don't think you were
Yeah.
there. And so I'm like rediscovering parts of our relationship. And yeah, we call it the before time, and we laugh about
Yeah.
it because it's like, yeah, that was before, but I'm here now.
I love Kev.
He's awesome. He's really a
He's
cool
so,
guy.
like, he's just been like, yeah, he's stuck by you, and it's wow.
Yeah.
He's a great human being.
I would like to hope that he feels really rewarded for his efforts
Yeah.
because like I said, I love who I am now. Like I
Mm,
really love the Amanda I've become, and again, a lot of it was having to make those decisions for myself, but I can
mhm.
100% say that I'm a better wife and friend to him, and a lot of that is because of him. So,
Yeah. So, and this might be one of those really ignorant things, so bear with me, but I have heard this in life. I don't know where, I can't tell you, but
yeah.
what do you say, or how do you feel about, someone that, here you are 5 mental health disorders, including bipolar 2. You're on medication night and day. Is there a fear or a concern, or ever, maybe fear and concern aren't the right words. Are you ever like, oh, I feel so good, maybe I don't need these meds?
Ooh, yeah. So that is a thing with
It
people
is.
who have bipolar
Yes.
disorder.
Right. Okay.
And I would say also coupling in my anxiety as well, because my
Mm.
anxiety is always making up other stories and explanations in my head. And so, again, this is where my therapist is amazing because she listens to all of my rantings about things.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had a week on meds, and then I had a check-in of, hey, how are your meds working? And I told my therapist the day before the appointment, I was like, I feel like I'm on placebos and I feel so much better and it's all a trick. And they're gonna be like, haha, you're not sick, you were doing it for attention. Like, haha, we caught
Mm.
you. And she was like, Amanda, people who are sick don't they don't
Right.
think that way. Like, it's like also the constant dialogue in my head of like, am I a narcissist? But I'm like, no, narcissists don't know they're narcissists. And so it's
Mm.
this constant thing. But so for me personally, living with bipolar 2, my meds regulate me by bringing me up. They bring me out of constant depression. So I live
Okay.
my life at this like normal level and I still experience sadness, but I don't slip into that deep depression.
Right. It
And
doesn't
I
consume you.
right, and my mania is in check, so it's not out of control mania. Speaking from experience, I have family members that have bipolar 1
Mm-hmm.
and the meds do the opposite for them. So again, think about if you're living in extreme, I was in extreme depression, think about the
Mm.
opposite mania. Those
Mm-hmm.
meds purpose is to bring you down to normal level.
Mm.
And so while I love my meds and I will never stop taking them because they make me happier, I couldn't imagine the feeling of being brought down,
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so there have been a couple days where I get out of my routine, and routine is really important for people with bipolar. It's
Mm-hmm.
extremely important. And there are days, that stuff happens and I get out of my routine and I've forgotten to take my meds. And I will, say something snarky or like snap at my husband, and we'll both look at each other. And I've made him promise me that he will always ask me, no matter the outcome, like, hey, did you take your meds today?
Mm.
And that's just like, I have promised him that I will never get mad, but you need to ask me that question because, again, a family member unfortunately lost their life to battling that disorder because of, like you said, the med situation. And so I was like, it's a non-negotiable. And
Yeah.
so I'm glad that I again have that with friends and family, but I couldn't imagine feeling like the meds took away who you are as a person, where
Yeah.
I feel like the meds enhance me, you
Right.
know?
Right. No, that's an amazing clarification. Thank you for that, because
hmm
that makes a lot of sense. And
Well, and that's where, like, again, the media, like,
yeah.
again, the biggest thing I can think about is like Britney in 2009 and Kanye West in and out
Right.
of the media over the past couple of years. And Kanye has been quoted to saying, I like being off my meds because when I'm off my meds, that's who I really am. I'm not
Yeah.
being stifled. I'm not being like my creativity is at its peak. And he's right,
Yes.
kind of,
Right. Right.
but it's not sustainable.
Right.
And that's
Right.
where it comes in. And that's where this like notion and narrative of like, oh, they're off their meds. It's like,
Right.
yeah, but there's so
That's
much
really
more that
tough. Yeah.
goes into it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really tough, especially, and I've thought about him a lot too, in the sense that, it's his livelihood to be creative. And
hmm
I mean, at this point, I think it's pretty, without knowing, we know that probably all of his albums and his fashion line, all of that
Yeah.
were created off of meds.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
And like I
Yeah.
look at my own life and like you said at the beginning, like, oh, you run your brand and you have a podcast and you have these books. And I'm like, yeah, I was all pre-diagnosed because I was like, boom, boom, boom,
Ah.
boom, 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 serial entrepreneur. And
Yeah.
that was a fear of mine, like, oh, because that's the thing I
Mm.
heard about bipolar is, oh, am I not going to be who I am? And my job is quite literally to be a creative person.
Yeah.
But now if anything, my meds regulate me to be sustainable. So I can put down what I'm working on and go eat dinner or
Yeah.
go take my dogs on a walk. And it's not this hyper fixation, again, with my ADHD coming in too. It's not
Mm,
this hyper fixated, like, no, I cannot live until I finish this.
yeah.
It's regulated me. So again, I like who I am on medication.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, do you think that in your experience, I know for yourself, yes, but just based on the advocacy work you've done and
Hmm.
your podcast and all of that, like, is it common to have other mental health disorders combined with bipolar? Is it like most people are just straight up like bipolar, or most people have probably a couple different things going on?
From my personal experience in talking, like being in bipolar support groups, it's very
Yes,
rare that it's just
just
bipolar.
bipolar. Okay.
And so, again, and there's multiple different types of bipolar. With bipolar 2, you are also really likely to have major depressive disorder and anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
Those go pretty much hand in hand. With bipolar 1, borderline personality disorder can come into that, along with some other personality disorders too.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it is very interesting how the brain
Yeah.
works, and all
Yeah.
that. But there's definitely, comorbidities in that sense that it's rarely just bipolar, mostly because it's complicated to diagnose. So again, I got the depression anxiety diagnosis before we arrived
Right.
at that diagnosis.
Right. Okay. So now that you are in the place you're in, have you implemented any processes, systems, strategies for running your business and dealing with your illnesses? Like, how do you make all of that work?
Yeah, so currently I'm really fortunate. I work for myself. I own my own business and I have social media contracts out where I'm contracted to like assist other people with running their platforms.
Okay.
And again, why I loved your automated message so much is because with each thing that I do, I come up with an acceptable response rate. And
Okay.
so is it 24 hours? Is it 12 hours? What is the response rate that I find acceptable? And that fluctuates with how I'm doing. Am I high? Am I low? Where am I? And
Mm-hmm.
so I make sure personally in my own schedule to schedule at least one day of the week with nothing.
Yeah.
And then that's my grace day. Normally it's on Wednesday. It's my grace day of like, okay, I'm halfway through the week. What didn't I get to on Monday and Tuesday, or what is pressing coming up on Thursday and Friday that I need to prepare for?
Okay.
And so scheduling that in, and then also when like I said, I can feel when a manic episode is coming. When I start feeling like a depressive episode is coming, I start scheduling self-care. So I will write. I'm very visual. I write in my planner like 9 a.m. Did you brush your teeth? 10 a.m. Have you showered? And I future me writes these notes to myself of like, hey, I feel like coming on, like the bad times coming, so let's check in on us. And so it's kind of this mix of scheduling. Again, routine is so important to me. And from what I've learned, people with bipolar disorder,
Yeah.
but also just giving myself grace in that too, because my entire life I've operated at this superhuman level and just realizing that normal people don't operate that way and that's okay. And I can be normal, I can be average, and average
Right.
is okay. Average is welcome. Like, I
Yeah.
don't need an A plus in everything.
Right.
C's get degrees, and that's okay.
C's get degrees. That's funny. What? So routine, self care, like what? What does your routine look like to some extent? Like how? What have you found that works for you?
Yeah, so with me, sleep is incredibly important. Again, going into people with bipolar disorder, routine and sleep, they say the best thing you can do to help yourself not go into these rapid cycles of mania and depression is going to sleep on the same day that you woke up, which sounds weird.
Okay.
But if you think about it, it's like if you wake up on a Monday, you're going to bed before midnight on
Oh,
Monday.
interesting. Okay. Yeah.
And so that way you're not stimulating these insomnia manic moments. And
Mm.
so sleep is incredibly important for me. Again, I used to work a job where one day I'd wake up at 4 a.m. and do fish prep with the killer whales, or another
Wow.
day my shift would go until midnight and I wouldn't get home till 2 a.m. And so
Mm-hmm.
my routine was all over the place. Once I finally was able to work in a job that gave me, again, that freedom of the routine, and I know that, hey, I don't need to log on until 9 a.m. Some days I get up at 7 a.m. and work out, and some days I'm like, nope, I need sleep. My alarm's
Mm-hmm.
going off at 8:30 and I'm going to let myself sleep.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, for me, that looks like just listening to my body. And I'm very transparent with my clients. Like, hey, I have bipolar disorder. And that means that sometimes I'm not in control of what my brain is doing. And I'm going to be transparent with you and let you know that. And let's come up with an action plan. And I'm going to clue you in on, hey, I think, things aren't going too well. And can we figure out a compromise,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. Are you, and as you're talking, I'm in awe and I'm just amazed at how yeah, I don't know, you said it earlier and now it's really coming together for me how easily you're able to talk about all of this.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I wonder, and even the fact that you communicate it with your clients, like I think that's amazing. Like, and I hope that this comes off the way I want it to.
hmm
But I'm kind of getting the sense that you're gonna not take it wrong anyway. But like, in the sense that, mm, are you are you unique in that way? Like, or are you finding like like
You
I don't know,
know,
like are you like I don't know, I'm just like
yeah,
whoa, like you're
I
awesome, like Amanda's a rock star. Are you encountering like a lot of other rock stars like you, or do you feel like you are like leading a charge? Do you know what I'm saying?
yeah, I
How's that for a question?
I like that. You just fed my ego, and I'm gonna take that and write that down somewhere on a post-it note so I can look at it.
Do it.
That made me feel good. I will say that. Um, you know, I have met other people with bipolar too, and again, like it's such a spectrum.
I know
And
it's hard to. I know, and thank you for answering everything so graciously
oh
because I know
no,
it's so generalized that
it
and
is.
yeah.
And while it has taken me again this long living quote unquote sick, I am in like a Twitter support group and connecting with people on LinkedIn who are open about being bipolar and Facebook and all this. And everyone has such a different experience. And there's sometimes that I question myself, like, am I
Mm.
bipolar enough to talk about this?
Oh
Like,
wow.
am I
Okay.
sick enough?
Yeah.
Like, again, and you start questioning yourself. And I'm like, yeah, I have PTSD, but like, I wasn't in Afghanistan, like, and like, am I
Mm.
weak? Is that why? And so it is interesting. And I definitely have to check myself often because, again, while what I'm going through could be inspiring to someone else, it could also be, I don't know, hurtful too,
Right.
in the same sense as someone's looking at me and is like, wow, I have the same disorder as her, but like, oh, she's doing all
Yeah.
these things, you know? And
Yeah,
so
and
it
like
is,
she's got rainbows everywhere and I feel
yeah,
like I want to crawl inside a
yes,
hole. Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
And so I would definitely say being in the mental health advocacy space, I think with the pandemic and everything that happened, a lot of people were clued into depression, anxiety, and they were
Yeah.
like, wow, okay, these are real things. I'm going through it stuck in my home. I'm feeling anxiety, I'm feeling depression.
Mhm.
And again, I was cool about talking about that. I was cool about about being on medication for that. And the moment I got this bipolar diagnosis, I was like, ooh.
Yeah.
And ooh, I know, ooh. And I had to come to terms with it and really
Mm.
own it. And then I thought to myself, wow, if I'm feeling that way, there's got to be other people that feel that way too.
Yeah.
And so, even just learning about bipolar disorder in college and learning about how much it's changed within the past 20 years, I think about my family member that had it, that again lost their life, that
Mm.
they were told that they weren't going to hold a normal job and they couldn't be a normal functioning human in society and their
Yeah.
brain was broken and
Ugh.
tough, you know?
Yeah.
And now I'm like, no,
Yeah.
no. I'd like to think that I'm a stand-up member of society. And I've
You
really
are.
just coined
Like, you
this
are. Yeah.
this phrase for myself is that like my disorders are my superpower. And
Yeah.
I always thought of myself as an empath. And yeah, that makes sense why, is because I literally feel in extremes. And I love that about myself because I can connect with everyone on the spectrum because I've experienced it all.
Yeah.
And that's just my message that I'm trying to embody. Again, living by example is that it's not my downfall, it's what makes me unique, which again is what I've always like strove for.
Hmm.
And having bipolar disorder is my superpower
Yeah.
because it just is, and no one can convince me otherwise, you know? And my hope is that other people own that about themselves, whether it's ADHD or depression or anxiety. Like, that's what makes you unique. And the more you
Yeah.
talk about it, the less scary it becomes. And the more you're going to find that other people are like you know?
Yeah. 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 Yes. Thank you. I mean, it's just so, yeah. It's, I don't know. You're just, you're great. I just think like you're so cool. Like you're just so cool. You're just
it's
knocking down
it's
doors
been
left and right.
years of work though, you know?
And thank you for saying that.
And I
Yes.
think if I would have gotten this diagnosis when I was the Amanda in college at like 18, 22, I don't think I would be this evolved
Yeah.
and enlightened. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I had to literally crawl through my 20s for
Mm-hmm.
survival. And now it's to the point at 29 that I'm like, oh my gosh, my best decade is ahead of me. I am
Yeah.
enlightened. I'm in therapy. I'm on meds. Like, oh, I'm
Yeah. Like, let's
unstoppable.
go.
And I
Giddy
I
up.
I can't say that I would have felt that way in my early 20s because I was
Yeah.
so concerned with what everyone thought about me. And now
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, yeah, I don't care.
Yeah. 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 All right. So I have a couple of other questions, but before I go to those, the PTSD,
Yeah.
is that something you want to share about, or like, I guess, yeah, I still think it's pretty common to associate that with veterans.
Hmm.
What is your association with it?
Yeah, same thing. I was really ashamed when I got that diagnosis because I was like, I don't have a war story.
Right.
I don't have this like trauma moment, like a big capital T trauma.
Uh-huh.
And what I learned, what my psychiatrist taught me is that, yeah, PTSD can be brought on by big T traumas. So, like a big life altering event that your
Right.
brain is just shocked and has to process through. Or it can be comprised of a lot of little T traumas and
Mm-hmm.
a lot of things that all add up. And for me personally, working in the animal field, I was again working to exhaustion. I experienced, unfortunately, the circle of life many times with animals and
Wow.
having
Yeah.
to watch an animal pass away in front of you and just awful things that are out of your control and burnout and compassion fatigue and again just anxiety being undiagnosed for so long. And so my PTSD chalks up to my body being in survival mode for way too long,
Mm-hmm.
that it that was the only way it learned to cope. And even so, like there's still, even though I'm on meds and I was having night terrors, and that's how it got diagnosed, is I was waking up in a sweat and having these awful vivid nightmares. And my poor husband, I would just be screaming and thrashing in my
Oh my
sleep.
goodness.
And again, it's not these big moments that happened. It was, I still have dreams of not locking a lock correctly when I worked at the zoo and an elephant getting out, and it's
Wow.
these
Yeah.
small moments, but again, the pressure. And a lot of part of that with me was very self-conscious because there's so many people that are still zookeepers and there's so many people that do these hard jobs, but and I have to just, again, give myself grace that, like, okay, but it wasn't just PTSD I was dealing with. There's also 4 other things that were
Right.
going on, and it was this huge combination of it.
Right.
And so, yeah, there's still moments that it gets brought on. Like, I've been having zoo nightmares recently because my children's book just came out, which is about a zookeeper. And so it's like kind of coming back. And I'm like, okay, it's not my
Mm-hmm.
reality. I'm safe. I'm okay, you know? But it's
Yeah.
wild.
Yeah. Have you? It just reminded me of there was a TikTok trend that people are like, not my monkeys, not my zoo, not my
Yes.
monkeys, not my zoo.
Yes.
And that's like literally and figuratively your world.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Okay, so tell me about your children's books. I know I only have you for a few more minutes, but tell me about your children's books, how they came about and what people can expect from them.
Yes. Okay. So, as we have talked about, I'm a huge advocate for mental health. I personally think that in order to talk about mental health, you also have to talk about inclusivity. I feel like they go hand in hand
Mm.
because mental health, there's such an intersection when you talk about mental health and access and privilege and mental health in men versus women versus
Yes.
LGBTQ people, like you can't really talk
BIPOC.
about one without
Yep.
the other, and that goes for
Hmm.
health and a lot of other things. And so again, I really started in on this mental health thing. And then I realized, like, wow, a lot of my friends identify within this community and they need help too. And while I don't personally, I wear my ally badge real proud, And so I was approached to write this children's book. One of my sisters has this sweet friend who has her own publishing company. And she reached out to me and was like, hey, I know you just left the animal field and you were a zookeeper. I'm sure you have some really cool stories. Would you be interested in writing a children's book about them? And I was like, yeah, that's like on my 5-year plan is to write a book. And
Mm.
so we came out with this idea. So the series is called Manda's Magical Zoo. Hee hee.
It's cute. That's very cute.
Yeah, it's about this zookeeper who can talk to her animals. So she has this superpower of being able to talk to animals. And if you think back to the beginning of our conversation, I said that that was always my dream. I love animals and I wish that I could talk to them.
Yeah.
And so the first book we wrote kind of jumps in the middle of the series. It's called Jumo the Unicorn. And it's about this little rhino who thinks that he might actually be a unicorn. And he goes through this whole process of working up the courage to tell Manda. And then she receives it so well and is like, hey, yeah, if you want to be a unicorn, like, cool. I love it. And there's this awesome phrase that I love so much where she says, that's great because rainbow is my favorite color. Like, cool. You don't have to be one color. All of them are my favorite, so I don't care.
Mm.
And so then he goes through and tells all of his animal friends, like, hey, I think I'm a unicorn. And through this children's book, you learn, like, okay, some of them respond great, some of them not so much. And then they realize, wow, my words have weight. And when I responded that way, it affected Jumo, this rhino. And so they problem solve through it. And so it's this really great story of, you can take it the inclusivity way, but just about friendship and kindness and understanding and all of that.
Hmm.
And so that's the first book. And then the second book was just published last month, actually. And it's called Manda's Magical Zoo. So it's the first book in the series because when we launched Jumo the Unicorn, everyone's question was, okay, but how can Manda talk to animals? Like, you're not just gonna like skirt right past that.
Oh,
And
I'm not.
you're right.
She can't
And
just will it into
right.
existence.
And so like me being the marketing person that I am, I'm like, haha, you caught on. Like that's what I wanted is I wanted you to be like, wait a second, hey, you know? And
Uh-huh.
so I wrote the story about Manda getting her voice. And so the first book is all about her earning her training whistle. And so if you're an animal trainer or a zookeeper, you've or seen anyone that works at a zoo, you've seen that they have this whistle around their neck. And in
Mm.
the zookeeper world, it is a big deal to earn your training whistle. Like
Hmm.
you really have to work hard for it. And it's just this moment that every animal trainer has of like, oh my God, I earned my whistle.
Yeah.
And so I took this story of her working hard to earn her whistle. And there's this moment where she's trained hard and a scenario happens where an animal's in danger and she has to make the decision to either speak up and handle it herself or wait for someone else to come along. And it's this story of finding her voice and being brave and speaking out. And she realizes that her voice is her superpower. And while she has this amazing whistle and now can talk to animals, she has always had that voice. And so that kind of leads you into the rest of the series, that she's this constant of, no, I'm going to speak up for these animals and I'm going to make sure that they learn to speak up for themselves too.
Wow. Wow. Okay, and these are available on Amazon, I assume, your
Yes.
website.
Yep. So
Okay.
Amazon and Barnes and Noble online.
Okay.
So you can find them there. Jumo the Unicorn reached #1 bestseller, which I'm really proud of.
Congrats.
And then Mana's Magical Zoo debuted at #1 new release, which again, I'm just
Ooh.
astounded by. I said it came out last month. It came out 2 weeks ago.
Wow.
I said last month. Again,
Yeah.
my brain is constantly going. But yeah, 2 weeks ago.
Cool. Okay, so I will put all these links in the show notes, and
Yeah.
of course, last but certainly not least, Sunshine and Rainbows, the podcast.
Yes.
I love your tagline. It's all sunshine and rainbows until it's not.
Until it's not. Yes, that is basically how I live my life. If you stumble upon my colorful corner of the internet, you will see that, yeah, colors make me extremely happy. I love learning more about color theory and just the way that, like, your mood can be changed by the colors you surround yourself with. And rainbow is my favorite color. I love rainbow so much. Just there's so much symbolism in them, but I have always just clung to the rainbow and loved every part of it. And so when I was wanting to start this podcast about mental health, I was like, with social media, everyone just has this highlight reel and everyone thinks that my life is all sunshine and rainbows when really it's kind of dark and stormy. And so that's kind of where it came from. It's like, okay, it is until it isn't. So let's
Yeah.
talk about that.
Cool. And so, and just in a, I know I'm like keeping you a little
Oh my
over
gosh,
now, but
no.
like, what has the podcast done for you?
Oh, it has helped me find my voice and helped me take a step back to allow others to use their voice. And when I first started it, it was just, I was alternating between telling my own stories and guests. And finally, I got to this point where I was like, these voices need to be amplified. And I can talk all day about my story, and that's great, but that's what my Instagram's for. It's all about me and my TikTok and all of that. So why not use this platform that I've created and this dedicated community to give other people a chance to share their story that might not have the opportunity to? And so
Yeah.
it's really turned into it's guests only interview. And so it's humbling for me to just sit back and listen to people tell their story and just have that freedom to talk openly and not be judged and just share what they've been through. So
Yeah.
it's helped me, take a step back, which is good.
Yeah. You have a lot going on. Let someone take the reins for
Right.
30 minutes. Yeah. All right. Well, Amanda, thank you so much. This was so personally informative, and like I said, I think you are doing wonderful things. You're such an amazing advocate, and everyone please go check her out in all the places because it's so happy to look at, but truthfully so real. And I just appreciate everything you're doing. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for, again, giving me the space to blab. You keep apologizing that you're taking up my time, but I'm the one talking in like waterfalls of words. So thank you. Thank you. And again, thank you for all that you're doing and creating spaces for people to open up and learn.
That's what we gotta do. Gotta keep
Mm-hmm.
talking about it. So, all right. Thank you.
Rockstar, right? Amanda. Oh my God. Not only are you awesome because of your accomplishments, but also because of how freely and openly you share your story. It is wonderful to talk to someone who is willing to help us all understand more about particularly what it's like to live with bipolar 2 disorder. I feel like, it's a term that we've all heard before, right? Especially if you're into pop culture, and we mentioned on the show, we talk about Britney, we talk about Kanye, but do we really know what it's like? I didn't know the difference between 1 and 2. I didn't know any of that. So thank you. And I just want to say I definitely related to aspects of Amanda's story. I, too, am a Capricorn, and I've recently discovered that I am an Enneagram 3. I don't know much about this yet, but everyone keeps talking to me about it, so I figured I would take one of those darn tests. So the desire to be defined by our accomplishments and productivity, and the need for those accomplishments and productive efforts to be recognized by others is right on the money. I get her there. I totally get her there. So please check out her podcast, Sunshine and Rainbows. Her children's books, they're amazing. And her social media platforms and website are loaded with resources. You can learn more about her. You can learn more about supporting mental health causes and finding support for yourself. So thank you, Amanda. Thank you for listening. That's all I've got. See you next time. Bye. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Sass Says is a production of Luann Nigara, Inc. This podcast is meant to be educational and not meant to replace professional therapy or professional medical attention. To learn more about today's show and what's new in my world, head over to sasssays.com. Thanks so much. Talk later.